Now adjourn.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you know, the climate crisis is on our doorstep. This year, our country has been burning from unprecedented climate-fueled wildfires. 131,000 square kilometers of land this summer burned alone, more than double the next worst wildfire year on record. And in a vicious feedback loop, this in turn has released more than 1.5 times our annual emissions from carbon stored in trees and soil. It's clear we need urgent and bold action, and it should go without saying that this means we need to stop building fossil fuel infrastructure. In fact, this is what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says, quote, "The truly dangerous radicals are the countries that are increasing the production of fossil fuels." He goes on to say, investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure is moral and economic madness. Yet, this is exactly what the province of Ontario is doing. They're planning to build new gas plants that will increase emissions from the province's electricity sector and then lock them in with long-term contracts and financing arrangements. And while the governing party has committed Canada to achieving a net zero carbon electricity grid by 2035, their recently released regulations meant to achieve this have been weakened so badly that loopholes now allow for expanded and prolonged use of natural gas on the electricity grid. Specifically, these loopholes allow for 2 natural gas plants to operate at full capacity 24/7 until the end of 2040 and 2037. They allow for all of Ontario's gas plants except one to operate for 450 hours per year. And worst of all, they allow for the Government of Ontario to proceed with its plans to build up to 1,500 megawatts of new gas-fired generating capacity. So what does this mean? It means these loopholes in the draft regulations allow for greenhouse gas pollution from Ontario's power plants in 2035 to exceed their 2017 levels by up to 178%. What's the point of so-called clean electricity regulations if they allow emissions to almost triple? 35 municipalities, including the City of Kitchener, I'm proud to say, together representing almost 60% of the province's population, have now passed resolutions calling for the opposite, to phase out gas power in Ontario by 2030 or sooner. The good news is it's not too late. The federal government published these draft regulations on August 10th. The formal consultation on the regulations end November 2nd. We could still have regulations that truly do achieve net zero emissions from Canada's electricity sector by 2035, as the government has said their intention is. But to get there, we've got to absolutely stop building new fossil fuel infrastructure, and this includes expanding natural gas-fired electricity. Heck, we could do it sooner if we really wanted to. A new report from the Clean Air Alliance shows that Great Lakes wind power could supply more than 100% of Ontario's current electricity needs. We could build it in less than a year at 40% the cost of nuclear. The Ontario government, though, is not going to do it on their own. Will the Parliamentary Secretary today commit to strengthening the clean electricity regulations, including these loopholes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Climate Change and Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's been a good summer, and it's nice to see you back here in the House of Commons, and it's also nice to see my friend and colleague from Kitchener Centre. The member from the Green Party is a voice of reason in this House, and I want to thank him for bringing really good ideas forward to this House. I've accepted this new position as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Climate Change and the Environment, and every time that I've stood up in the House of Commons on behalf of the Minister until now has been to, unfortunately, speak to the opposite speak to members from the Conservative Party who believe that we're doing too much to fight climate change and believe that we should do less to fight climate change. So it's refreshing to be sitting just down the way from a member who believes, like I do, that we ought to do more to fight climate change, and who agrees that creating a clear path forward to a net zero electricity grid by 2035 is absolutely essential to enabling other parts of the economy to decarbonize by switching fuels, and to exemplify why I believe personally this is so important. I have a brief anecdote. I often talk about my past as an Olympic athlete in this House. It's where I come from, and I think we all come from different places in this House. There's 338 members with 338 different backgrounds. And when I was 20 or 22 years old, I was training at a very high level. And in 2005, the air quality was so bad in Ontario that I actually had to travel to Europe for the remainder of the summer to complete my training for the World Championships. And, you know, this was disappointing because living in Canada, we grow up thinking that this is a beautiful and clean country with a massive hinterland with lots of trees that clean our air. But the fact was, back then in 2005, Ontario still relied on coal to generate electricity, and that led to really, really bad air quality levels. And in 2005, Madam Speaker, there was actually over 40 smog days in the province of Ontario that affected our little area halfway between Hamilton and Toronto disproportionately on the 16-Mile Creek at the Burloak Canoe Club. So I was really proud of the fact back then that the Liberals of the day ran on a commitment to end all coal-fired power generation, and that we were actually the first jurisdiction in North America, in Ontario, to do so. And, you know, it's important to recognize that today, in 2023, we're 15 years or so removed from that reality of ending coal-fired power. But since then, we have not had a single smog day. These policy decisions have a really, really important impact on our life, on our health, on our livelihood, in our communities, and certainly on our ability to fight climate change, which is the most existential threat of our generation. Now, all G7 countries have committed to net zero electricity by 2035, and the US government just released its clean power regulation last spring. A clean electricity grid is also becoming an increasingly important factor in international competitiveness as investors, industry, and consumers are all looking for clean power. Our government's using a range of tools, including regulations, investment tax credits, and funding programs to clean Canada's electricity grid, and it's working closely with provinces to identify regional priorities for clean energy. And Madam Speaker, I would like to acknowledge that across Canada, every province has a different intermix of electricity generation. We have provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta that still use quite a lot of coke, coal, and a majority of natural gas. Gratefully, in Ontario, our strong hydroelectric contributions as well as nuclear mean that over 80% of our grid is greenhouse gas free, and it means that only 6% of our electricity generation comes from natural gas, but it's important to make sure that that doesn't grow. We want to make sure that our grids get cleaner and cleaner, particularly the ones that are still using coke and coal to generate electricity, which is last century's technology. So to send clear and early signals to investors and utilities, we've published the draft Clean Electricity Regulations in August 2023 for public comment, and that will set a technology-neutral emissions performance standard that fossil fuel-fired electricity generation will need to meet by 2035. Those draft regulations include some flexibilities to enable some provinces and utilities to continue to provide reliable and affordable energy and electricity to their consumers as they transition to 100% clean electricity. Those flexibilities enable some ongoing natural gas generation in strictly circumscribed conditions, and certainly not all, and certainly not in the way of growing those capacities. The CER, along with other complementary measures, will help spur investment in clean electricity, and they will send strong signals to avoid investment in new unabated.
The Honourable Member for Kitchener Centre.
Well, thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary, and congratulations to him on his new role. I'm looking forward to working with him. But given his experience in Ontario, he should be just as angry as I am that we have a province that's looking to actually increase natural gas on the electricity grid, and their only way to stop doing so is by closing what he calls flexibilities. I'm calling a loophole in these regulations. Will he commit to ensuring these regulations do not allow for new fossil fuel infrastructure to get built in Ontario?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I apologize for going over time in my last intervention. As I was saying, the clean electricity regulations, along with other complementary measures, will help spur investment in clean electricity, sending strong signals to avoid investment in new unabated natural gas generation projects, and will help drive forward the development of emerging clean technologies. And we really need to address the squeakiest wheels in Canada. I am angry at the provincial government's plans to increase natural gas electricity production in this province, just as my colleague had mentioned. I am also frustrated that we have provinces in Canada that continue to use coke and coal to generate electricity, which means that if a consumer buys an electric car in one of those provinces, they plug the car in, and instead of running on gasoline, it actually runs on a less clean product like coke and coal, which is something that we want to try to avoid and encourage provinces, ensure provinces, I should say, to get off of that. So, Madam Speaker, in conclusion, the clean electricity regulations are just one action that we are taking to move Canada's electricity sector to net zero and to expand the generation of clean electricity to support other sectors in their decarbonization plans. And I thank my members.
The honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's good to see you back, and good to see my